Okay, 14.2 is human genetic disorders. So, have you ever heard the expression, it runs in the family? Well, relatives or friends might have said that about your smile or the shape of your ears, but it could mean that they talk of diseases and disorders. So, what is a genetic disorder? So, how do small changes in DNA molecules affect human traits? Changes in a gene's DNA sequence can change proteins by altering their amino acid sequences, which may directly affect one's phenotype. And remember, phenotype is the way something looks. So molecular research techniques have shown a direct link between genotype and phenotype. So for example, people of African and European ancestry are more likely to have wet earwax, the dominant form, and those of Asian or Native American ancestry most often have the dry form, which is recessive. So a single DNA-based change from guanine to adenine in the gene for a membrane transport protein causes this protein to produce dry earwax instead of wet earwax. I bet y'all never guessed we're going to be talking about earwax in here. So there's a direct connection between molecule and trait and between genotype and phenotype. So in other words, there's a molecular basis for genetic disorders. Changes in a gene's DNA sequence can change proteins by altering their amino acid sequences, which may directly affect one's phenotype. So there are thousands of genetic orders that are caused by changes in an individual's genes. These changes often affect specific proteins associated with important cellular functions. We've talked about the next one in class earlier. There's a disorder caused by a defective allele for beta globin, 1 or 2 polypeptides in hemoglobin, the oxygen carrying protein in red blood cells. The defective polypeptide makes hemoglobin less soluble, causing hemoglobin molecules to stick together when the blood's oxygen level decreases. The molecules clump into long fibers, forcing cells into a distinctive sickle shape, which gives the disorder its name, the sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell-shaped cells are more rigid than normal red blood cells, and they tend to get stuck in the capillaries. If the blood stops moving through the capillaries, it damages the cell, tissues, and even organs as a result. Cystic fibrosis is most common among European ancestry. Most cases result from the deletion of just 3 bases in the gene for a protein called cystic fibrosis membrane conductance regulator, which is CFTR. As a result, the amino acid phenylalanine is missing from their protein. CFTR, and we're still talking about cystic fibrosis, normally allows chlorine ions to pass across cell membranes. The loss of these bases removes a single amino acid, phenylalanine, from CFTR, causing the protein to fold improperly. The misfolded protein is then destroyed. When cell membranes unable to transport chloride ions, tissues throughout the body malfunction, and children with CF has serious digestive problems and produce thick, heavy mucus that clogs their lungs, decreasing passageways. People with 1 normal copy of the CF allele are affected by CF because they can produce enough CFTR to allow their cells to work properly. So 2 copies of the defective allele are needed to produce the disorder, which means the CF allele is recessive. Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is caused by a dominant allele for a protein found in brain cells. The allele for this disease contains a long string of bases in which the codon CAG, coding for the amino acid glutamine, repeats over and over again more than 40 times. Despite intensive study, the reason why these long strings of glutamine cause disease is still not clear. The symptoms of Huntington's disease, namely mental deterioration and uncontrollable movements, usually do not appear until middle age. The greater the number of codon repeats, the earlier the disease appears and the more severe are its symptoms. So, genetic advantages. Disorders such as sickle cell, anemia, and CF are still common in human populations. In the United States, the sickle cell allele is carried by approximately 1 person in 12 of African descent, and the CF allele is carried by roughly 1 person in 25 of European ancestry. So why are the alleles still around if they can be fatal for those who carry them? Well, most African Americans today are descended from populations that originally lived in West Central Africa, where malaria is common. And malaria is a mosquito-borne infection caused by a parasite that lives inside red blood cells. So individuals with just 1 copy of the sickle cell allele are generally healthy, and they are also highly resistant to the parasite, giving them a great advantage against malaria. You have a map in your book that will show the parts of the world where malaria are and the sickle cell allele. So more than 1,000 years ago, the cities of medieval Europe were ravaged by epidemics of typhoid fever. Typhoid is caused by a bacterium that enters the body through cells in the digestive system. The protein produced by the CF allele helps to block the entry of this bacterium. So individuals that are heterozygous for CF would have had an advantage when living in cities with poor sanitation and polluted water, and because they also carried a normal allele, these individuals would not have suffered from the cystic fibrosis. So what are the effects of errors in meiosis? Well, if non-disjunction occurs during meiosis, gametes with an abnormal number of chromosomes may result, leading to disorders of chromosome numbers. And the most common error in meiosis occurs when homologous chromosomes fail to separate. This mistake is known as non-disjunctive, which means not coming apart. And non-disjunctive may result in gametes with an abnormal number of chromosomes, which can lead to a disorder of chromosome numbers. So if 2 copies of an autosomal chromosome fail to separate during meiosis, an individual may be born with 3 copies of that chromosome. This condition is known as trisomy, meaning 3 bodies. The most common form involves 3 copies of the chromosome 21, and it's Down syndrome, which is often characterized by mild to severe mental retardation and high frequency of certain birth defects. Non-disjunction of the, my neighbor's going by. Non-disjunction of the X chromosome can lead to a disorder known as Turner syndrome. A female with Turner syndrome usually inherits only 1 X chromosome. Women with Turner syndrome are sterile, which means that they are unable to reproduce. Their sex organs do not develop properly at puberty. So in males, non-disjunction may cause Klinefelter syndrome, resulting from the inheritance of an X chromosome, which interferes with meiosis and usually prevents these individuals from reproducing. There have been no reported instances of babies being born without an X chromosome, indicating that this chromosome contains genes that are vital for the survival and development of the embryo.